The voice that drifted through the cottonwood trees was so haunting and beautiful that Dalton McCoy felt his heart crack open like an old dried riverbed, finally receiving rain. He had been tracking a lost calf for the better part of 3 hours, his horse tired and his mood worse, when the melody stopped him cold. It was 1878 in northern Arizona territory, and the summer heat was brutal, but the sadness in that song seemed to drop the temperature 10 degrees. He dismounted slowly, careful not to snap any branches, and moved toward the creek that wound through the red earth like a silver ribbon. The woman sitting on a flat rock had her back to him, her honey-colored hair falling loose past her shoulders, and she was singing words he could not quite make out, but the sorrow in them was unmistakable. Dalton had never been one to intrude on private moments, but something in that voice pulled at him with an intensity that frightened him. At 24 years old, he had seen enough of life to know when something mattered, and this moment, this woman, this song mattered more than he could explain. He stood there among the trees, his hat in his hands without realizing he had removed it, and listened as she sang about lost love and broken promises and days that would never come again. When she finally stopped, the silence felt heavier than stone. "I did not mean to intrude on your privacy," Dalton said quietly, stepping out from the shade. The woman spun around so fast, she nearly lost her balance on the rock, and he found himself looking into the most extraordinary green eyes he had ever seen. They were red-rimmed from crying, and her cheeks were wet with tears, but even in her sorrow she was breathtaking. "I apologize. I was tracking a calf and heard you singing." She wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "You should not sneak up on people like that. This is private land." "I know. It is my family's land." Dalton kept his distance, not wanting to frighten her further. "I am Dalton McCoy. My father owns the ranch that borders this creek for 5 miles in either direction." The woman stood up from the rock, and he could see now that she was wearing a simple cotton dress that had seen better days, the hem muddy from the creek water. "I apologize for trespassing. I will leave immediately." "No, please." Dalton took a step forward, then stopped when he saw her tense. "You are not trespassing. The creek is free for anyone who needs it. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." "I am perfectly fine." Her voice was sharp, defensive, and he could see her building walls around herself even as she spoke. "I appreciate your concern, but I do not need assistance from anyone." Dalton nodded slowly, knowing when to retreat. "All right. But if you ever do need anything, the McCoy Ranch house is about 2 miles north of here. The big stone one with the red roof." He started to turn away, then looked back. "You have a beautiful voice. I hope whatever is causing you sadness passes soon." He walked back to his horse, leading the animal away from the creek, but his mind stayed with the woman by the water. There was something about her that had lodged itself in his chest like a splinter, painful and impossible to ignore. He found the lost calf an hour later, tangled in some brush, and by the time he got back to the ranch house, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. His father, Douglas McCoy, was on the porch smoking his evening pipe when Dalton rode up. "Found the calf?" "Yes, sir. She was stuck in some mesquite about a mile south, cut up pretty bad, but she will survive." Dalton dismounted and handed the reins to one of the ranch hands. "Pa, do we have any new neighbors near the South Creek?" Douglas looked at his son with interest. "Not that I know of. Why do you ask?" "I saw a woman there this afternoon. Young woman, maybe 20 or so, with blonde hair. She was singing by the creek." Dalton sat down on the porch steps, suddenly tired. "Saddest singing I ever heard." His father puffed on his pipe thoughtfully. "Could be one of the Gardner girls. Old Thomas Gardner has a place about 3 miles south of that creek. He has a daughter, I think. maybe 2. I have not seen them in years, not since his wife passed. The name clicked into place in Dalton's memory. He had heard of Thomas Gardner, a farmer who had tried to make a go of it in the harsh Arizona earth and had met with mixed success. What do you know about them? Not much. Gardner keeps to himself mostly. Grows what he can, raises a few head of cattle. Why the sudden interest? Dalton shrugged, trying to seem casual. Just curious. She seemed troubled. His father gave him a knowing look but said nothing more, and Dalton was grateful. He went inside to wash up for dinner, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman by the creek. That night, lying in bed, he could still hear her voice, and he made a decision that surprised even himself. He would go back to the creek tomorrow, and if she was there, he would find out what was making her so sad. And somehow, someway, he would find a way to make her smile. The next morning dawned clear and hot, and Dalton found himself making excuses to ride south. He told his father he wanted to check the fence line near the creek, which was not entirely a lie, but it was not entirely the truth either. The truth was that he could not stop thinking about the sad-eyed woman with the beautiful voice, and he needed to see her again. She was there, sitting on the same flat rock, but this time she was not singing. She was just staring at the water, her arms wrapped around her knees, looking small and lost. Dalton approached more openly this time, letting his horse's hooves make noise on the rocky ground so she would hear him coming. She turned as he rode up, and he saw recognition flash in her eyes, followed quickly by wariness. "Good morning," Dalton said, dismounting. "I was hoping I might see you again." "Why?" The word was blunt, almost hostile, but he could hear the curiosity beneath it. "Because I have been thinking about your singing all night, and I wanted to know if you were feeling any better today." He left his horse ground tied and walked closer, but not too close. "And because I realized I never learned your name." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he was trustworthy. Finally, she said, "Olivia Gardner." "It is a pleasure to meet you properly, Miss Gardner." Dalton meant it sincerely. "Your father is Thomas Gardner, the farmer to the south." Olivia nodded, some of the wariness leaving her face. "Yes, we have the place about 3 miles from here. I come to the creek when I need to think." "And cry," Dalton added gently. "And sing sad songs." Her face flushed and she looked away. "I did not think anyone would hear me. I am glad I did." Dalton sat down on the ground near the rock, deliberately making himself lower than her so she would not feel threatened. "Not because I enjoyed hearing you sad, but because I think maybe you needed someone to hear you. Sometimes carrying sadness alone makes it heavier." Olivia looked at him with surprise, as if she had not expected such understanding from a stranger. "You sound like you know something about sadness." "Everyone knows something about sadness, Miss Gardner. It is part of being human." Dalton picked up a small stone and tossed it into the creek, watching the ripples spread. "My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. It took her slow, and there was nothing any of us could do but watch her fade away. For a long time after, the ranch felt too quiet, too empty. My father threw himself into work, and I threw myself into being angry at the world." "What changed?" Olivia asked softly. "Time. And realizing that my mother would not have wanted us to stop living just because she was gone." Dalton looked up at her. "But I still have days where the sadness catches me by surprise. I will smell something that reminds me of her, or hear a phrase she used to say, and it hits me all over again." Olivia was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mother died too, 3 years ago. But that is not why I was crying yesterday." Dalton waited, not pushing, just letting her decide what she wanted to share. The creek burbled past them, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out. Finally, Olivia took a deep breath and said, "I was supposed to be married next month." His name was Robert, and we had been engaged for a year. 2 weeks ago, he came to the house and told me he had changed his mind. He said he was moving to California and that I would only hold him back. The words came out flat, emotionless, but Dalton could hear the pain underneath them. I am sorry, that is a terrible thing to do to someone. The worst part is that I was not even that surprised. Olivia laughed, but it was a bitter sound. He had been pulling away for months, making excuses not to see me, talking more and more about leaving. I just did not want to see it. I thought if I was patient enough, loving enough, he would remember why he asked me to marry him in the first place. It is not your fault, Dalton said firmly. If he could not see what he had, that is his failing, not yours. Everyone in Williams thinks I am a fool. Williams was the nearest town, about 15 miles east, where folks went for supplies and church. All my friends knew before I did. They tried to warn me, but I would not listen. Now I am the girl who got left behind. Dalton stood up and walked closer to the rock, close enough that Olivia had to look up to meet his eyes. You are not the girl who got left behind. You are the girl who dodged a bullet. Any man who would treat you that way did not deserve you in the first place. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes and she blinked them away furiously. You do not even know me. How can you say that? Because I can hear it in your voice when you sing. There is depth there and feeling and beauty. Those things do not come from nothing. They come from a soul that knows how to love deeply, and that is precious. Dalton held her gaze. I do not know much, Miss Gardner, but I know that much is true. Olivia stared at him, and for a moment Dalton thought he had overstepped, said too much, revealed too much of what he was feeling. But then she smiled, just a tiny curve of her lips, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. You are very kind, Mr. McCoy. Dalton, please. And I am not being kind. I am being honest. He smiled back at her. And I am making you a promise right now. I am going to find ways to make you smile like that every day until you forget why you were sad in the first place. Olivia's smile widened just a fraction. That is a bold promise. I am a bold man. Dalton grinned. What do you say, Miss Gardner? Will you give me a chance to prove it? She hesitated, and he could see her weighing the risk of trusting someone new against the loneliness he could see lurking in her eyes. Finally, she said, I suppose it could not hurt, but I cannot promise I will be good company. I am still rather sad. That is all right. I am good enough company for both of us. Dalton offered his hand to help her down from the rock. Come on, I want to show you something. Olivia took his hand, and the touch sent electricity through Dalton's whole body. Her hand was small and work-roughened, the hand of someone who knew labor, and when she stepped down from the rock she stumbled slightly and he caught her, his hands going to her waist to steady her. For a moment they stood close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair, and then she stepped back, blushing. Thank you. I am not usually so clumsy. No harm done. Dalton led her to his horse. Can you ride? Of course I can ride. I grew up on a farm. There was a touch of indignation in her voice that made him smile. Then up you go. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at first, uncomfortable with the intimacy of sharing a saddle, but gradually relaxed as he kept his hold on her respectful, and his attention on guiding the horse. He turned them north, away from the creek, and rode toward the edge of his family's property where the land rose up into red rock formations that looked like they had been carved by giants. They rode in silence for a while, and Dalton was acutely aware of every breath Olivia took, every small movement she made. He had known her for less than a day, had spoken to her for perhaps an hour total, but something about her had grabbed hold of him and would not let go. It was not just her beauty, though she was beautiful. It was something in her spirit, something strong and resilient that called to him. Finally, they reached the place he wanted to show her. It was a narrow canyon between two towering rock walls, and at the end of it was a small waterfall that fed into a clear pool. The walls blocked out most of the harsh sun, making it 20 degrees cooler than the open desert, and the sound of the falling water was peaceful and soothing. Dalton dismounted and helped Olivia down. My mother showed me this place when I was 8 years old. She said it was a place where the world slowed down enough for you to think clearly. After she died, I used to come here when everything felt like too much. Olivia walked to the edge of the pool and knelt down, trailing her fingers in the water. It is beautiful, like a secret. It is a secret. Very few people know about it. My father, me, and now you. Dalton sat down on a smooth rock. I wanted to share it with you because I thought you might need a place like this. A place where you can come and just be, without worrying about what anyone thinks or expects. Olivia turned to look at him, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears, but this time they looked like good tears. Why are you being so nice to me? Dalton considered the question seriously. Honestly, because when I heard you singing yesterday, something in me recognized something in you. And because I think you deserve kindness right now, and I want to be the one to give it to you. You do not even know me, Olivia repeated, but there was less conviction in it this time. Then let me get to know you. Dalton leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Tell me about yourself, Olivia Gardner. Tell me what makes you happy when you are not sad. Tell me what you dream about. Tell me what you want from life. Olivia sat down on the ground, her skirts pooling around her, and looked at the waterfall. I do not know what I want anymore. I thought I wanted to marry Robert and have a family and live a quiet life. Now I do not know what I thought I knew. So start smaller. What made you happy when you were a little girl? A small smile touched Olivia's lips. Books. I loved books. My mother taught me to read when I was 4, and I could not get enough of them. We did not have many, but the ones we had I read over and over until the pages were falling out. She glanced at him. I used to dream about going to a big city where they had libraries full of books, shelves that reached the ceiling, more books than I could read in a lifetime. What else? Singing. I have always loved to sing, even though I am not very good at it. You are excellent at it, Dalton corrected. I have never heard anyone sing with as much feeling as you do. Olivia blushed. You are just being nice again. I am being honest again. There is a difference. Dalton picked up a pebble and tossed it into the pool. What else? Horses. I love horses. We only have 2 old plow horses on the farm, but I love them anyway. When I was little, I used to pretend I was a cowboy riding across the open range. She laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound of it made Dalton's heart skip. That probably sounds silly. It does not sound silly at all. It sounds like you have an adventurous spirit. Dalton stood up and walked over to where she sat, then lowered himself to the ground beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel his presence. Can I tell you something? All right. I think this Robert fellow did you a favor by leaving. Not because you deserved to be hurt, but because he clearly did not appreciate who you are. He saw someone who would hold him back when he should have seen someone who could have been his partner in whatever adventures he wanted to have. Dalton picked up a strand of grass and twisted it between his fingers. You deserve someone who sees you for who you really are and loves you for it. Olivia was quiet for a long time, staring at the water. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. How can you be so sure? Because I can see you, Olivia. Even after only knowing you for a day, I can see that you are strong and smart and brave enough to sit by a creek and sing about your sadness instead of pretending it does not exist. I can see that you have dreams that are bigger than this small corner of the world, even if you are too scared to admit it right now. And I can see that whoever ends up winning your heart is going to be the luckiest man alive." Olivia turned to look at him, and there were tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "You are quite possibly the most romantic man I have ever met, Dalton McCoy. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I have not decided yet." But she was still smiling, and that was enough for him. They sat by the waterfall for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Olivia told him about growing up on the farm, about her father's struggle to make the land productive, about her mother's death, and how it had hollowed out their little family. Dalton told her about ranch life, about the endless work and the occasional moments of beauty, about his dreams of expanding the ranch and maybe starting a horse breeding program. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, and Dalton felt like he had known her for years instead of hours. There was a comfort between them that he had never experienced with anyone else, a sense that he could say anything and she would understand. When the sun started to climb higher, and the heat began to penetrate even their shaded canyon, he reluctantly suggested they head back. "I should get home anyway," Olivia said, standing up and brushing off her skirt. "My father will wonder where I am." "I will ride you back." Dalton helped her onto his horse again, and they made their way out of the canyon. Instead of going back to the creek, he asked her for directions to her father's farm and rode her all the way home. The Gardner place was smaller than he had expected, just a small wooden house and a barn that had seen better days, surrounded by fields that looked like they were struggling in the harsh soil. As they approached, an older man came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall and thin, with weathered skin and gray hair, and he looked at Dalton with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Olivia, who is this?" "Father, this is Dalton McCoy. His family owns the ranch to the north. He gave me a ride home." Olivia slid down from the horse with practiced ease. "Mr. McCoy, this is my father, Thomas Gardner." Dalton dismounted and extended his hand. "Pleased to meet you, sir. I hope you do not mind that I brought your daughter home. I met her at the creek yesterday and we got to talking." Thomas shook his hand, his grip firm despite his age. "McCoy, you say? I knew your father years back. Good man. Helped me out once when I first moved here and did not know which end was up." He looked between Dalton and Olivia, and something in his expression softened. "You are welcome here any time, young man." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." Dalton turned to Olivia. "Same time tomorrow, at the creek." Olivia glanced at her father, who gave a small nod, then looked back at Dalton. "Same time tomorrow." Dalton rode home with a grin on his face that would not quit, and when his father asked him at dinner why he looked so happy, he just said he had a good day. But that night, lying in bed, he let himself admit the truth. He was falling for Olivia Gardner, falling hard and fast, and he did not care if it was crazy or too soon or any of the other things people might say. He had heard her singing sadly by the creek, and he had vowed to give her reasons to smile, and he was going to keep that vow no matter what it took. The days that followed fell into a pattern that Dalton looked forward to with an intensity that surprised him. Every morning, he would finish his chores as quickly as possible, then ride south to the creek where Olivia would be waiting. Sometimes she would be singing, her voice carrying across the water, but more often she would just be sitting on her rock, watching the current flow past. And every day, Dalton would find something new to show her or tell her or do to make her smile. One day he brought her a book he had ordered from a catalog, a novel by someone named Jules Verne about traveling around the world. Her eyes had lit up when she saw it, and she had clutched it to her chest like it was made of gold. "I cannot accept this. It is too much." "Of course you can accept it. It is a gift." Dalton had smiled at her delight. "Besides, I expect you to tell me all about it when you finish so I can know if it is worth reading myself." Another day he brought her wildflowers he had picked from the high meadows, a riot of colors that seemed to capture the Arizona landscape in miniature. She had laughed and woven them into her hair, and the sight of her with flowers tucked behind her ear had nearly stopped his heart. But the best days were the ones where he did not bring her anything except himself, where they just sat and talked for hours about everything under the sun. She told him about her dreams of seeing the ocean, of visiting big cities, of having a house full of books and children and laughter. He told her about his plans for the ranch, about wanting to breed horses that could handle the harsh desert climate, about his secret love of poetry that he had never told anyone before. Poetry? Olivia had raised an eyebrow, teasing him. Big tough cowboy like you reads poetry. Even cowboys have souls, Miss Gardner. But he had been smiling. My mother used to read Wordsworth to me when I was little. I guess it stuck. As the weeks passed, Dalton could see the sadness lifting from Olivia like morning fog burning off in the sun. She smiled more easily now, laughed more freely, and the haunted look in her eyes was fading. But more than that, he could see her opening up to the possibility of being happy again, of trusting again, and it filled him with a fierce protectiveness and an equally fierce love. Because yes, it was love. He had known it for sure about 2 weeks after they met, when she had done something as simple as tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, and his entire world had shifted on its axis. He loved her. He loved the way she thought deeply about things, the way she was not afraid to challenge him when she disagreed, the way she could find beauty in the smallest things. He loved her strength and her vulnerability, her dreams and her fears, everything about her. But he did not say anything yet. He could sense that she was not ready to hear it, that she was still healing from Robert's betrayal, still learning to trust herself again. So he waited, content to show her through his actions what he could not yet say with words. One afternoon, about a month after they met, Olivia surprised him by suggesting they ride into Williams together. I need to pick up some supplies for my father, and I thought maybe you could show me around. I have not been to town since before. Well, since everything happened with Robert. Dalton understood immediately. She was ready to face the gossips and the pitying looks, ready to hold her head high and show the world that she was doing just fine. I would be honored to accompany you. They rode into Williams on a Saturday morning when the streets were busy with farmers and ranchers coming in for their weekly shopping. Dalton could feel people staring as they rode past, could hear the whispers starting up in their wake. He guided his horse closer to Olivia's, a subtle show of support and solidarity. At the general store, they ran into a group of women who were clearly Olivia's former friends. Their leader, a blonde woman with sharp features, looked at Olivia with false sympathy. Olivia Gardner, we have been so worried about you. We heard you were taking Robert's departure very hard. Olivia straightened her spine and met the woman's eyes calmly. I am doing perfectly well, Margaret, but thank you for your concern. And it was not a departure, it was a broken engagement. There is a difference. Margaret's eyes flickered to Dalton, and he could see the calculation in them. And who is this? This is Dalton McCoy. He and I have been spending time together. Olivia's voice was steady and clear. Dalton, this is Margaret Patterson and her friends, ladies. Dalton tipped his hat, his expression polite but not overly friendly. He had already decided he did not like Margaret Patterson or the way she was looking at Olivia like she was a wounded animal to be pitied. Well, Margaret seemed taken aback by Olivia's composure. It is good to see you are moving on so quickly. The barb was obvious, the implication that Olivia was being improper or desperate, but Olivia just smiled sweetly. It is easy to move on when you realize you were never that attached in the first place. Now, if you will excuse us, we have shopping to do. She walked past them with her head high, and Dalton followed, his admiration for her growing even more. When they were out of earshot, he said quietly, "You handled that beautifully. I wanted to slap her, but I settled for being gracious." Olivia's hands were shaking slightly, and Dalton took one of them in his, squeezing gently. "You are stronger than all of them put together." They finished their shopping and loaded the supplies onto the horses, but before they left town, Dalton made a detour to a small restaurant that had opened recently. "Have lunch with me. We can celebrate your victory over the gossips." Olivia laughed, and it was a sound of pure joy. "All right. But I am buying my own meal." "Absolutely not. When a man takes a woman to lunch, he pays. It is the rule." "Is this a date, then?" Olivia asked, and there was something careful in her voice, something hopeful and scared at the same time. Dalton stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing in the middle of the dusty street, people flowing around them, but in that moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "If you want it to be. I have been wanting to ask you properly for weeks now, but I did not want to rush you." Olivia looked up at him, and the walls she had built around herself after Robert's betrayal finally came down completely. "I would like it to be a date. I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Dalton's face felt like it might crack his cheeks. "Then it is definitely a date." They had lunch in the little restaurant, sitting by the window and talking about everything and nothing. Dalton ordered steak and Olivia ordered chicken, and they shared a piece of apple pie for dessert. It was simple and perfect, and when they finally left to head home, Dalton felt like he was walking on air. As they rode back toward the Gardner farm, Olivia said quietly, "Thank you, Dalton." "For what?" "For keeping your promise. For giving me reasons to smile." She looked over at him, and her eyes were bright. "I did not think I would ever feel happy again, but you have shown me that I can, that I deserve to be. You deserve everything good in this world, Olivia." Dalton meant it with his whole heart. "And I intend to spend as much time as you will let me proving it to you." When they reached her farm, Thomas Gardner was sitting on the porch, and he waved them over. "Got something I want to talk to you about, McCoy." Dalton dismounted and walked up to the porch, suddenly nervous. Thomas had been welcoming enough, but he was still Olivia's father, and Dalton was very aware that his intentions toward Olivia were serious. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, then said, "My daughter has been happier in the past month than I have seen her in years." "I assume I have you to thank for that." "I hope so, sir. I have certainly been trying. I can see that." Thomas knocked his pipe against the porch railing, emptying the ashes. "I am going to speak plainly with you, son. Olivia has been hurt once already, and I will not stand by and watch it happen again. If you are not serious about her, if you are just passing time until something better comes along, you need to walk away now." Dalton met the older man's eyes without flinching. "I am very serious about her, Mr. Gardner, more serious than I have ever been about anything in my life. I know it has only been a month, but I love your daughter, and if she will have me, I intend to marry her." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Good. That is what I wanted to hear. You have my blessing to court her properly, but I expect you to treat her with respect and honor." "I would never do anything less, sir." "Then we understand each other." Thomas stood up and shook Dalton's hand. "Now get out of here before dinner time. I am sure you have your own family waiting for you." Dalton rode home with his heart pounding. He had just declared his intentions to Olivia's father, had said out loud that he wanted to marry her. The reality of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had never felt this way about anyone before, had never been so certain of anything in his life. That night at dinner, his father looked at him with amusement. "You have been riding south a lot lately." "Yes, sir." "Would this have anything to do with the Gardner girl?" Dalton set down his fork and met his father's eyes. "It has everything to do with her. I am courting her, and I plan to ask her to marry me when the time is right." Douglas McCoy leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, it is about time. I was starting to think you would never settle down. I needed to find the right woman." Dalton felt a smile tugging at his own lips. "And I found her. Bring her to dinner. I want to meet the woman who has turned my son into a lovesick fool." Dalton laughed. "I will ask her. But I am not a lovesick fool. Son, you have been walking around with a grin on your face for weeks and riding south every single day without fail. You are the very definition of a lovesick fool." But Douglas was smiling as he said it. "I am happy for you. Your mother would have liked this." The mention of his mother made Dalton's throat tight. "I wish he could have met Olivia. I think they would have gotten along." "I think so too." Douglas raised his glass. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Dalton echoed, clinking his glass against his father's. The next day, Dalton arrived at the creek with a specific purpose. He found Olivia sitting on her rock as usual, reading the Jules Verne book he had given her, and his heart swelled at the sight. She looked up when she heard him approach and smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. "Good morning," she called. "I am almost finished with this book. It is wonderful. Good morning." Dalton dismounted and walked over to her. "I have a question for you, all right? My father wants to meet you. He has invited you to dinner at our house tomorrow night." Dalton could feel nervousness fluttering in his stomach. "I know it is a big step, meeting the family, but I would really like you to come." Olivia closed the book carefully and looked at him. "Are you sure? Meeting the family is serious." "I am very sure. I told my father last night that I am courting you and that I intend to marry you someday, and he wants to meet the woman who has stolen my heart." Olivia's breath caught. "You told him you want to marry me." "I did. I told your father the same thing yesterday." Dalton moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I know it has only been a month, and I know you might not be ready to hear this yet, but I love you, Olivia Gardner. I have loved you since the day I heard you singing by this creek, and I want to spend the rest of my life giving you reasons to smile." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, but she was smiling so wide it looked like it might hurt. "You love me, with everything I am." Dalton reached up and wiped away her tears with his thumbs. "You do not have to say it back. I just needed you to know. But I want to say it back." Olivia's voice was shaking. "I love you too, Dalton. I have been trying not to because it scared me, because I did not think I could trust my own feelings anymore. But I do love you. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see the best in me even when I cannot see it myself." Dalton pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and she buried her face against his chest. They stood there by the creek, wrapped up in each other, and Dalton felt like his heart might burst from happiness. This was what he had been waiting for his whole life without even knowing it. This woman, this moment, this love. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. Dalton cupped her face in his hands and kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then finally, gently, her lips. It was a soft kiss, sweet and full of promise, and when they broke apart, Olivia was glowing. "So you will come to dinner?" Dalton asked, his forehead resting against hers. "I will come to dinner." Olivia smiled. "I will go anywhere with you." The next evening, Dalton picked Olivia up from her farm in the wagon rather than on horseback. She was wearing her best dress, a pale blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and she had braided wildflowers into her hair. She looked beautiful and nervous, and Dalton spent the entire ride to his ranch house trying to reassure her. "My father is going to love you," he said for the third time. "You have nothing to worry about. What if he thinks I am not good enough for you? What if he thinks I am just a poor farmer's daughter trying to marry up?" Dalton pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. "Olivia, look at me. My father judges people by their character, not their bank account. And even if he did not like you, which is impossible because you are wonderful, I would still love you and still want to marry you. You understand?" Olivia nodded, taking a deep breath. "All right, I am ready." The McCoy ranch house was impressive. A large stone structure with a red roof that commanded a view of the surrounding land. Dalton helped Olivia down from the wagon and led her inside, where his father was waiting in the parlor. Douglas McCoy stood up when they entered, and Dalton could see him assessing Olivia with sharp eyes. "Father, this is Olivia Gardner." "Olivia, my father, Douglas McCoy." Olivia curtsied slightly, a nervous gesture. "It is an honor to meet you, Mr. McCoy. Thank you for inviting me to your home." Douglas smiled, and it transformed his stern face into something warm and welcoming. "The honor is mine, Miss Gardner. My son has told me a great deal about you, and I am delighted to finally meet you in person. Please, sit down. Dinner will be ready shortly." They sat down and talked while they waited for the housekeeper to announce dinner. Douglas asked Olivia about her family, about growing up on the farm, about her interests, and she answered with growing confidence as she realized he was genuinely interested in what she had to say. By the time they moved to the dining room, the nervousness had faded from her face, and she was smiling easily. Dinner was a feast by any standard, with roast beef and potatoes and fresh bread and vegetables from the ranch garden. They talked about everything from cattle prices to books to the territorial government, and Dalton watched with pride as Olivia held her own in the conversation, offering intelligent opinions and asking thoughtful questions. After dinner, they moved back to the parlor for coffee, and Douglas said, "Miss Gardner, I want to thank you for bringing joy back into my son's life. He has been a different person since he met you, and it has been a blessing to see." Olivia blushed. "He has brought joy into my life as well, Mr. McCoy. I was in a very dark place when we met, and he has been nothing but kind and patient with me." "That is because you are worth being kind and patient with." Douglas set down his coffee cup. "I will be blunt with you, Miss Gardner. My son has told me he intends to marry you, and I want you to know that you have my full support and blessing. You are exactly the kind of woman I hoped he would find." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. McCoy. That means more to me than I can say. Call me Douglas, please. If you are going to be my daughter-in-law, we should be on a first-name basis." He smiled at her. "Now, I am going to make myself scarce so you two can have some time alone. But Olivia, you are welcome in this house anytime. Consider it your home as well as ours." After Douglas left, Dalton and Olivia sat together on the settee, her hand clasped in his. "That went well," Dalton said with a grin. "Your father is wonderful. I see where you get your kindness from." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. "I was so nervous, but he made me feel welcome immediately. I told you he would love you." Dalton kissed the top of her head. "Everyone who meets you loves you. It is impossible not to." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying being close to each other. Finally, Olivia said softly, "When you said you wanted to marry me, did you mean it?" "I have never meant anything more in my life." Dalton shifted so he could look at her properly. "I know it is fast, and I know people will say we are rushing, but I do not care. When you know, you know. And I know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want that too." Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. "But I am scared, Dalton. What if I am not a good wife? What if I disappoint you? You could never disappoint me." Dalton took both her hands in his. "Olivia, I am not asking you to be perfect. I am asking you to be yourself, the woman I fell in love with. That is all I need, all I will ever need." Olivia smiled through her tears. "Then yes. If you ask me properly, the answer will be yes." Dalton's heart leaped. "Are you sure?" "I do not have a ring yet. I have not planned anything romantic. I just know that I want you to be my wife more than I want my next breath. I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything." Olivia cupped his face in her hands. "You have given me back my joy, my hope, my belief that I deserve to be loved. How could I not say yes?" Dalton kissed her then, properly this time, a kiss full of passion and promise and love. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and grinning like fools. "I am going to make you the happiest woman in Arizona territory." "You already have," Olivia whispered. They told Thomas Gardner the next day, riding out to the farm together in the early morning. Thomas was working in the barn when they arrived, and he looked up with a knowing smile when he saw their joined hands and glowing faces. "I take it you have some news for me, Mr. Gardner. I am asking for your permission to marry your daughter." Dalton's voice was steady and sure. "I love her with all my heart, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making her happy." Thomas set down the tool he was holding and walked over to them. He looked at Olivia first, his eyes searching her face. "Is this what you want, daughter?" "More than anything, father." Olivia's voice was clear and certain. "I love him and I want to be his wife." Thomas nodded slowly, then turned to Dalton. "You treat her right, you hear me? You honor her and protect her and make sure she knows every day how much she is loved." "I will, sir. You have my word." "Then you have my blessing." Thomas pulled Olivia into a hug, and Dalton could see tears in the older man's eyes. "Your mother would be so happy for you, sweetheart. She always wanted to see you settled with a good man." They spent the rest of the morning at the farm, making plans and talking about the future. Thomas suggested they wait a few months before the wedding, to give Olivia time to prepare properly and to let the gossip about Robert die down. But Dalton and Olivia were impatient, and they compromised on a 2-month engagement. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Olivia worked on making herself a wedding dress with help from a seamstress in Williams, altering a pattern to fit her perfectly. Dalton made arrangements for a small wedding at the church in Williams, with a reception afterward at the ranch house. They decided to keep it simple and intimate, just family and close friends, the way they both wanted it. During this time, their love continued to deepen. They spent every spare moment together, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future, learning each other's quirks and habits, building the foundation for a life together. Dalton took Olivia to meet the ranch hands and showed her around the property that would soon be her home. She took him to visit her mother's grave and told him stories about the woman he would never meet, but who had shaped the woman he loved. One evening, about a month before the wedding, they were sitting by the creek again, watching the sun set over the red rocks. Olivia was quiet, and Dalton could sense something weighing on her mind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. Olivia was silent for a moment, then said, "Do you remember the day we met, when I was singing by this creek?" "I remember every detail." "You were sitting on that rock, and you looked so sad I thought my heart would break. I was singing about lost love and broken dreams. I thought my life was over, that I would never be happy again." Olivia turned to look at him, and her eyes were shining. "But you heard me, and you cared enough to stop and listen. And then you kept your promise. You gave me reasons to smile every single day until I forgot why I was sad." Dalton pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "You saved me too, you know. I did not even realize I needed saving until I heard your voice. You made me believe in love again, in the possibility of finding someone who truly understands me. I think we saved each other." Olivia kissed him softly. "And I cannot wait to marry you and start our life together." "2 more weeks," Dalton murmured against her lips. "I can make it 2 more weeks." But those 2 weeks felt like an eternity. Dalton threw himself into finishing the renovations he had been making to one of the rooms in the ranch house, turning it into a private sitting room for Olivia, where she could read and sew and have space that was just hers. He filled it with bookshelves and ordered books from catalogs, determined to give her the library she had always dreamed of. He also worked with his father to section off a part of the ranch that would be his and Olivia's, giving them independence while still keeping them close to family. Finally, the day of the wedding arrived. It was a perfect October morning, cool and clear, with the kind of blue sky that seemed to go on forever. Dalton stood at the front of the church in Williams, his heart pounding, watching as people filtered in and took their seats. His father stood beside him as his best man, and the minister waited patiently for the bride to arrive. And then the church doors opened, and Olivia walked in on her father's arm, and Dalton forgot how to breathe. She was wearing a simple white dress that she had made herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she had flowers woven into her hair. But it was her face that stopped him, the pure radiant joy shining from her as she walked toward him. This was the woman who had been singing sadly by the creek just a few months ago, and now she was walking toward him with a smile that could light up the world. Thomas placed Olivia's hand in Dalton's, and the older man's eyes were wet with tears. "Take care of her, son." "With my life," Dalton promised. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke their vows in clear voices, promising to love and honor and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. When the minister finally said, "You may kiss your bride," Dalton pulled Olivia into his arms and kissed her like it was the first and last kiss all rolled into one, and the small congregation burst into applause. The reception at the ranch house was a joyful affair, with food and music and dancing. Dalton watched as Olivia laughed and talked with the guests, completely at ease, and he marveled at how far she had come from the broken-hearted woman he had first met. She caught him watching her and smiled, that secret smile that was just for him, and he felt his love for her expand until it filled every corner of his being. As the sun began to set, Dalton pulled Olivia aside and led her away from the party, out to the porch where they could be alone for a moment. "Happy, Mrs. McCoy, happier than I ever thought possible." Olivia wrapped her arms around his neck. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for giving me reasons to smile." That was the easy part. Dalton kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." They stood there wrapped in each other's arms as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, and Dalton knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, hard times and difficult days, but they would face them together. And there would be joy, so much joy, building a life and a family and a future in this wild, beautiful land they both loved. That night, after the guests had gone home and the ranch house was quiet, Dalton carried Olivia over the threshold of their room. She laughed and protested that she could walk, but he insisted, wanting to honor the tradition. He set her down gently and she looked around the room, seeing for the first time the sitting area he had created for her. "Dalton," she breathed, walking over to the bookshelves. "When did you do all this?" "I have been working on it for weeks. I wanted you to have your own space, your own library." He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I plan to spend the rest of our lives filling these shelves with books for you." Olivia turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much. I did not know it was possible to love someone this much. I love you too, more than words can say." Dalton kissed her then, and it was different from all the kisses that had come before, deeper and more intimate, full of promise for the night ahead and all the nights to come. The first months of their marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Olivia moved into the ranch house and began to make it her own, adding touches that made it feel like a home rather than just a place where men lived. She planted flowers around the porch and hung curtains in the windows and filled the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread and herbs. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and long days, the constant work that went into keeping everything running smoothly. But she also brought change in ways no one expected. She suggested improvements to how the ranch was run, ideas she had learned from growing up on a farm, and Douglas and Dalton were smart enough to listen. She started a vegetable garden that produced more than they could eat, and she taught the ranch hands how to preserve food for the winter. She also began working with the horses, and it turned out she had a gift for training them, a patience and understanding that even Dalton had to admire. "You are full of surprises, Mrs. McCoy," Dalton said one evening as they watched her work with a particularly skittish mare. The horse had been nearly impossible to handle, but under Olivia's gentle touch it was beginning to calm and trust. "I told you I loved horses," Olivia said with a smile. "I just never had the chance to really work with them before. You are a natural." Dalton leaned against the fence, watching his wife with pride and love. "I think we need to make you an official part of the horse training program. Over time, that is exactly what happened." Olivia became known in the area as someone who could gentle even the most difficult horses, and people started bringing their problem animals to the ranch for her to work with. She loved the work, and it gave her a sense of purpose and identity beyond just being a wife. Dalton encouraged her every step of the way, proud to be married to a woman who was carving out her own place in the world. Their first year of marriage was full of joy and laughter and love. They worked together during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, building a partnership that was as strong as it was passionate. They had their disagreements, of course, moments where their different backgrounds and perspectives clashed, but they learned quickly how to communicate, how to listen to each other, how to compromise. One evening in late summer, about 10 months after their wedding, Olivia asked Dalton to sit down because she had something to tell him. Her face was glowing with barely suppressed excitement, and Dalton felt his heart start to race. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right." Olivia took his hands in hers. "Dalton, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Dalton could not speak. He just stared at her, his mind trying to process the words, and then suddenly he was laughing and crying at the same time, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around. "We are having a baby, really, really." Olivia was laughing too, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You are going to be a father, and you are going to be a mother. Olivia, this is the best news I have ever heard." Dalton set her down carefully, suddenly worried. "Should I not have spun you? Did I hurt the baby?" "The baby is fine. I am fine. We are all fine." Olivia cupped his face in her hands. "We are going to be a family, Dalton. We are already a family. This just makes it bigger." Dalton kissed her softly. "I love you so much, both of you." They told Thomas and Douglas the next day, and both men were overjoyed at the prospect of becoming grandfathers. Thomas came to dinner at the ranch house and spent the evening talking about Olivia's childhood and giving unsolicited advice about raising children. Douglas immediately started making plans to build an addition onto the house for a nursery, and both Dalton and Olivia had to restrain him from starting construction that very night. The months of Olivia's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Dalton was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly worrying about Olivia's health and comfort. She bore his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from a place of love and excitement. She continued working with the horses well into her pregnancy, only stopping when her growing belly made it too awkward to move around easily. In late winter, on a cold February night, Olivia went into labor. Dalton rode into Williams to fetch the midwife while Douglas stayed with Olivia, trying to keep her calm and comfortable. The labor was long and difficult, and Dalton paced the hallway outside their room like a caged animal, unable to sit still or think about anything except his wife and the child they were bringing into the world. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard the sound he had been waiting for, the cry of a baby. He burst into the room without waiting for permission and found Olivia propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Dalton," she said softly, and he could hear the tears in her voice. "Come meet your son." A son. They had a son. Dalton walked over on shaky legs and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had dark hair like his and was waving one tiny fist in the air, his face scrunched up and red from crying. He was the most beautiful thing Dalton had ever seen. "Can I hold him?" Dalton asked, his voice rough with emotion. Olivia placed the baby carefully in his arms, showing him how to support the tiny head, and Dalton felt his entire world shift and realign around this small person. He had thought he understood love before, had thought his love for Olivia was the deepest thing he would ever feel, but looking at his son, he realized that love could expand and grow in ways he had never imagined. "What should we name him?" Olivia asked, watching her husband fall in love with their child. Dalton looked at her, then back at the baby. "What about James Douglas McCoy? James after my mother's father and Douglas after my father." "James Douglas McCoy," Olivia repeated softly. "I love it. Hello, James." Welcome to the world. Little James McCoy grew quickly, a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed fascinated by everything around him. Dalton took to fatherhood like he had been born for it, getting up for nighttime feedings and changing diapers without complaint and spending hours just holding his son and marveling at him. Olivia watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love with him, if that was possible. Thomas Gardner visited often, delighting in his grandson, and he and Douglas would sit on the porch for hours arguing amiably about the best ways to raise children and telling stories about when their own children were young. The ranch became a place filled with laughter and life, and everyone who visited could feel the love that permeated every corner. When James was 6 months old, Olivia returned to working with the horses, bringing the baby out to the corral in a basket where he could watch her work. She had lost none of her touch, and if anything, pregnancy seemed to have deepened her connection with the animals. Dalton would often stop whatever he was doing just to watch her, this remarkable woman who had come into his life singing sadly by a creek and who was now his wife, the mother of his child, his partner in every sense of the word. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia asked one afternoon, catching him watching her with that particular expression on his face. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how different my life would be if I had not heard you singing that day." Dalton walked over and kissed her. "I am thinking about how you were sad, and I vowed to give you reasons to smile, and somehow along the way you gave me more reasons to smile than I could have imagined." "We gave each other reasons to smile," Olivia corrected. "That is what love does." They stood there in the afternoon sun, their son gurgling happily in his basket nearby, and Dalton knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not some grand, dramatic gesture, but this quiet moment, this simple peace, this sense of being exactly where he was supposed to be with exactly the person he was meant to be with. The years passed, and their family grew. 2 years after James, they welcomed a daughter they named Grace, a tiny girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn chin. 3 years after that came another son, Thomas, named for Olivia's father, who had passed away peacefully in his sleep the previous winter. Each child was loved fiercely, and raised with the same values of hard work, kindness, and integrity that both Dalton and Olivia held dear. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Dalton's horse breeding program became known throughout the territory, and Olivia's training methods were sought after by ranchers and farmers from miles around. They expanded the property, buying out a neighboring ranch that had gone under, and hired more hands to help with the increased workload. But no matter how busy they got, they always made time for each other and for their children, understanding that family came first. As the children grew, Dalton and Olivia made sure to pass on the things that mattered to them. They taught all three children to ride almost before they could walk. They read to them every night, filling their minds with stories and adventures. They taught them to respect the land and the animals, to work hard and to be honest, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. And they taught them about love. Not through lectures or speeches, but through example. The children grew up watching their parents laugh together and work together and sometimes argue but always make up. They saw the way their father looked at their mother like she was the most precious thing in the world, and the way their mother leaned on their father when she needed support. They learned that love was not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment, a daily decision to put someone else's happiness alongside your own. One evening when James was 15, Grace was 13, and Thomas was 10, the family was sitting on the porch after dinner watching the sun set. It had become a tradition over the years, this quiet time together at the end of the day, and even as the children got older and developed their own interests and friendships, they still made time for it. "Ma," James said suddenly, "tell us again how you and Pa met." Dalton and Olivia exchanged glances, smiling. The children loved this story and never seemed to tire of hearing it. "Well," Olivia began, her eyes going distant with memory, "I was sitting by the creek, feeling very sad and very alone. I had just been through something difficult, and I did not think I would ever be happy again. So I was singing, just to let some of the sadness out, and I did not realize anyone was listening." "But Pa heard you," Grace chimed in. She knew this part by heart. "Your father heard me," Olivia confirmed, reaching over to take Dalton's hand. "And instead of just riding away and leaving me to my sadness, he stopped. He stayed. He listened. And then I vowed to give her reasons to smile," Dalton continued. "I did not know her, did not know anything about her except that she was in pain and that her voice was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. But I knew I had to try to help her." "Did you know you were going to marry her?" Thomas asked. "Not right away," Dalton admitted. "But I knew she was special. I knew she mattered. And then as I got to know her, I fell in love with her so fast and so hard that it took my breath away." "What did you think of Pa when you first met him?" Grace asked her mother. Olivia smiled. "I thought he was kind and handsome and a little bit presumptuous, assuming I needed his help when I had not asked for it. But mostly I thought he was kind. And in that moment, I needed kindness more than anything else in the world." "And then you got married and lived happily ever after," Thomas said with the satisfied tone of a child who knew the story had a happy ending. "Not quite that simple," Olivia corrected gently. "We got married, yes, but happily ever after is not something that just happens. It is something you build, day by day, choice by choice. Your father and I have had our share of hard times and disagreements and struggles, but we face them together, and that makes all the difference. You still love each other as much as when you first got married?" James asked, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was asking for a specific reason, perhaps dealing with his own feelings about a girl. Dalton and Olivia looked at each other, and the love that passed between them was so tangible that even the children could feel it. "I love your mother more now than I did on our wedding day," Dalton said firmly. Because every day we spend together, every challenge we overcome, every moment of joy we share, it deepens what we have. Love does not stay the same. It grows and changes and becomes richer. Your father is right, Olivia added. When we first married, I loved him with all my heart, but I did not really know him yet. Now, after all these years, I know him completely. I know his strengths and his weaknesses, his hopes and his fears, everything that makes him who he is. And I love all of it. That is a deeper, truer kind of love than what we started with. The children absorbed this silently, and Dalton could see them processing the information, storing it away to think about later. Then Grace said, I want a love like yours when I grow up. We want that for you too, Olivia said softly. We want it for all of you. Someone who sees you for who you really are and loves you for it. Someone who will give you reasons to smile even on your darkest days. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun finished its descent, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Dalton thought about how far they had come, he and Olivia, from that day by the creek to this moment surrounded by their children on their ranch. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. As the years continued to pass, the children grew into adults who made their parents proud. James showed an aptitude for business and eventually took over much of the ranch management, allowing Dalton to focus more on the horse breeding program. Grace inherited her mother's gift with horses and became a renowned trainer in her own right, turning down several offers to move to bigger cities because she loved the ranch and the life it offered. Thomas surprised everyone by developing a passion for medicine and went away to study to become a doctor. But he came back to the area to practice, determined to serve the community he loved. All three children eventually married and had children of their own, and the ranch house that Dalton and Olivia had filled with love expanded again to accommodate family gatherings and celebrations. Dalton and Olivia became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching with joy as their family tree spread and grew. But through all the changes and all the years, the core of everything remained the same: Dalton and Olivia's love for each other. They aged together, their hair turning gray and then white, their faces gaining lines that told the story of a life well lived. Dalton's hands became gnarled with arthritis, and Olivia's steps became slower and more careful. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young woman singing by the creek and the young man who had vowed to give her reasons to smile. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party at the ranch. The whole community came out to celebrate, filling the house and the yard with music and laughter and love. At one point, Dalton took Olivia's hand and led her away from the crowd, down to the creek where they had first met. You remember? He asked, standing on the bank and looking at the rock where she had been sitting all those years ago. I remember everything, Olivia said softly. I remember how sad I was, how lost I felt. I remember hearing your voice and thinking I should be angry that someone had heard me at my lowest moment. And I remember how you looked at me, not with pity but with understanding. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even with tears on your face. Dalton put his arm around her waist. And I remember making a promise to myself that I would find a way to make you smile. You kept that promise. Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. Every single day for 50 years, you have given me reasons to smile. It was not hard. Loving you has been the easiest and best thing I have ever done. Dalton kissed the top of her head. Would you sing for me, like you did that first day? Olivia looked up at him in surprise. I have not sung in years. My voice is not what it used to be. I do not care. I want to hear you sing. So Olivia sang, her voice thinner and less powerful than it had been in her youth, but still beautiful, still full of the emotion that had first captured Dalton's heart. But this time, she did not sing a sad song. She sang a song of love and joy and gratitude for a life well lived. And when she finished, Dalton had tears streaming down his face. "That was perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect." They stood there by the creek as the sun set, two old people who had loved each other for half a century and who loved each other still. The sound of their anniversary party drifted down from the ranch house, the voices of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the legacy of the love that had started with a sad song by a creek and a cowboy who had cared enough to listen. "Thank you," Olivia said quietly. "For what?" "For hearing me that day, for stopping, for caring." She turned in his arms to face him. "For giving me a life beyond anything I could have imagined, for giving me you." "Thank you for letting me love you," Dalton replied. "For trusting me enough to open your heart again after it had been broken. For building this life with me. For being my partner and my love and my best friend." They kissed then, a soft, gentle kiss that held 50 years of love and commitment and partnership. And when they finally walked back up to the party, hand in hand, everyone could see the joy shining from their faces. Dalton lived to be 73 years old, and Olivia lived to be 71. They died within months of each other, as if neither could bear to be without the other for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with headstones that read "Beloved Husband and Father" and "Beloved Wife and Mother." But everyone who had known them knew that those simple words could not capture the depth of what they had meant to each other, and to everyone whose lives they had touched. At Dalton's funeral, James stood up to speak about his father, and he told the story one more time about how his parents had met. "My father heard my mother singing sadly by a creek, and he vowed to give her reasons to smile. He kept that vow every day of their marriage. But what made their love special was that she gave him just as many reasons to smile. They saved each other, and in doing so they created something beautiful that has lasted beyond their lifetimes." After both of them were gone, the family made a decision to preserve the flat rock by the creek where Olivia had been sitting the day they met. They placed a small plaque there that read, "Here is where it began. Here is where love listened." And for generations after, members of the McCoy family would visit that spot when they needed to feel close to Dalton and Olivia, to remember the legacy they had left behind. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, and eventually passed to his children and their children after. The horse breeding program that Dalton had started remained successful, and Grace's training methods were documented and taught to new generations. Thomas opened a clinic in Williams that served the community for decades and trained other doctors who carried on his work. But perhaps the greatest legacy that Dalton and Olivia left behind was the love itself. Their children had grown up watching what real love looked like, and they chose partners and built marriages that reflected what they had learned. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren did the same, creating a family tree that was rooted in the values of kindness, commitment, and putting each other first. On what would have been their 60th wedding anniversary, the family gathered at the creek for a memorial. All of Dalton and Olivia's children were there, along with most of their grandchildren and many of their great-grandchildren. They sang songs and told stories and remembered the two people who had started it all. Grace, now an old woman herself, stood by the rock where her mother had once sat and said, "They taught us that love is not something that just happens to you. It is something you choose, something you work at, something you build day by day." My father heard my mother's sadness and chose to do something about it. My mother trusted my father enough to let him help her heal. And from those choices, from that kindness and that trust, came everything we are today. One of the great-grandchildren, a young woman named Olivia after her great-grandmother, asked, "Do you think we will ever find love like theirs?" Grace smiled, and in that smile everyone could see both Dalton and Olivia reflected. If you are brave enough to be vulnerable, to really see another person and let them see you, then yes. Love like theirs is possible for anyone who is willing to do the work. It is not easy and it is not always happy, but it is real and it is deep and it lasts. As the sun set over the creek that evening, the family stood together in silence, thinking about the two people who had brought them all into being. The water burbled past just as it had the day Dalton first heard Olivia singing, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sang out, its voice carrying across the red earth of Arizona. The story that had begun with a cowboy listening to a woman's sad song had become a legacy that stretched across generations. It had proven that love could heal, that kindness mattered, that taking the time to really see another person could change everything. Dalton had kept his vow to give Olivia reasons to smile, and in doing so he had given countless others reasons to smile as well. Their love had been simple in its beginning, just a man and a woman by a creek, but it had grown into something extraordinary. It had created a family, built a life, left a mark on the world that would not fade. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Dalton and Olivia were together still, loving each other as deeply and truly as they had from that very first day. The creek continued to flow, seasons changed, years passed, but the memory of their love remained constant. It was there in the way their descendants treated each other with kindness and respect. It was there in the values that guided the family through good times and bad. It was there in the stories that were told and retold, keeping Dalton and Olivia alive in the hearts of those who came after. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, people swore they could hear singing by the creek. Not sad singing like it had been at the beginning, but joyful singing. The sound of a woman who had found her happiness and held on to it for a lifetime. And if you listened very carefully, you could hear a man's voice joining in, harmony and melody intertwining just as two lives had intertwined so many years before. The cowboy had listened, and he had kept his vow. The woman had trusted, and she had opened her heart. Together, they had created something that would last forever. A love story that proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply care enough to stop and listen when someone is singing sadly by a creek. Because you never know when that small act of kindness might change everything, not just for that moment but for generations to come. And so the story ended where it had begun, by a creek in Arizona territory, with the echo of a song and the memory of a love that had conquered sadness and built something beautiful in its place. Dalton and Olivia's story was complete, their lives fully lived, their love fully realized, their legacy secure. They had found each other in pain and had chosen joy. They had started with a vow and had kept it faithfully until the very end. And in doing so, they had proven that true love, real love, the kind of love that lasts, is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It is about showing up every day and choosing to give someone reasons to smile, over and over again, until smiling becomes as natural as breathing and love becomes as essential as air. Their story was done, but its impact continued, rippling outward like stones thrown into still water, touching lives they would never know about, inspiring love they would never see. The cowboy and the woman by the creek had become legend, but they had also been real as the red earth and the blue sky and the creek that continued to flow. And that was perhaps the most beautiful thing of all. that ordinary people living ordinary lives could create something so extraordinary simply by choosing to love each other well.